In one of my earlier Alexander Hamilton videos, I talked a lot about Hamilton's early life leading up to his death in his duel with Aaron Burr. And that video was sort of kind of broad. And so in this video, I'm going to kind of narrow it down based on the things that I found in my research that I found were kind of important. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on in this video. Before Alexander Hamilton became the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury under President George Washington, he studied and practiced law. Hamilton had experience in journalism, from writing pamphlets about the Boston Tea Party to founding and publishing newspapers. Later, as a lawyer, he represented cases in favor of the Sedition Act against libel and slander directed toward his party and others. The controversial Sedition Act was passed by Congress in 1798 and was criticized for its suppression of freedom of speech and the press. During the Croswell case of 1804, Henry Croswell, who was accused of seditious libel for defaming Thomas Jefferson in some of his public writings. However, Hamilton also addressed the fact that Jefferson paid a man named Callender to slander George Washington and Adams, which would make the other party just as guilty as the defendant, which was Croswell. In the end, the court upheld their verdict that Croswell was guilty, but the case was dropped. And it was dropped because Croswell was never sentenced after he was found guilty. So they just let him go. In the end, the court upheld their verdict that Croswell was guilty. Oh, but the case was dropped. I just said that. Hamilton played a role in this decision, as well as the laws that were passed afterward. For instance, he supported the doctrine of truth, quote, as the defense for the free press, unquote, in criminal libel cases when, quote, published with good motives and for justifiable ends, end quote, which was later adopted by, first it was adopted by the state, the New York State Constitution in 1821, later went on to be adopted by other state constitutions. It has been argued that Hamilton defended the Sedition Act and stricter versions of it to defeat his political adversaries. However, regardless of the position he took on it, his arguments in court have proven that the Constitution doesn't protect all forms of speech because it can harm others, which I think was the point of the Sedition Act, whether you agree with the act itself or not. And I just want to add to that oftentimes with freedom of speech, even now, there's like this delicate balance between going too far, invading somebody's First Amendment right, and not going far enough to stop people from harmful speech. And so it's just a question of how much is too much punishment, and or is it not enough punishment for depending on the type of speech. As we know now, the Constitution doesn't protect all forms of speech. Like the common example is you can't yell fire in a crowded room because you'll cause a stampede and it could kill others unless there's an actual fire. And I think the same applies here with the Sedition Act. And sedition, it's the difference between sedition and libel, by the way, they're both forms of defamation, but sedition is like forms of harmful speech. And libel, on the other hand, is like harmful written speech. So, but they're both forms of defamation, and they're both harmful because it can destroy a person's reputation, which is a serious crime. So I just believe that And I think Hamilton also recognized this because he was against uh, handing down the death penalty for sedition. But I also think he recognized this balance between First Amendment freedom of speech and which speech constitutes as libel and sedition. I just wanted to add that. So, in addition to law, Hamilton also made an important impact on our early economic system. The Revolutionary War had placed a heavy debt burden on the U.S., and there were debates among Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison, and others on how to relieve that debt in a way that was efficient and fair. In 1781, Hamilton wrote, quote, "'Tis by introducing order into our finances, by restoring public credit, not by gaining battles, that we are finally to gain our object," end quote. Taxation was one method of repayment, but the government also exchanged money for people's property. Hamilton urged, and after they got the people's property, I read that they confiscated it. So it's a pretty unorganized system. Hamilton urged that establishing good credit would enable the country to fund future wars. He stated, quote, "Discrimination in paying off debt is inconsistent with justice because in the first place it is a breach of contract in violation of the rights of a fair purchaser. The nature of the contract in its origin is that the public will pay the sum expressed in the security to the first holder or his assignee. The intent in making the security assignable is that the proprietor may be able to make use of his property by selling it for as much as it may be worth in the market, and that the buyer may be safe in the purchase," end quote. In other words, the contract, I believe, refers to the relationship between the borrower and lender. The security serves as the asset that protects the lender until the debt is paid off and is no longer a liability to them. And that's a liability to the lender. In the process, credit is established and built upon with repeated transactions. This constant exchange of liquid assets creates a constant cycle that encourages economic growth on a macro level. This was my interpretation of Hamilton's quote, so I hope I got that interpretation correct. That's what I got from his quote there. Nevertheless, Congress ruled in favor of Hamilton's economic strategy with a vote of 36-13. And Jefferson and Madison, those guys, I've noticed over the past few months doing my research, they're always losing to Hamilton. And I just think it's because Hamilton has better ideas that benefit the country more than Jefferson and his guys. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's what I got from my research.